Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to yet another edition of Truth to Power on ITV Networks, channel 347 on DSTV. My name is Faraz Patel. I'll be in your company for the next 1 hour. Now, at the end of October and at the start of November, the Democratic Alliance will be going into their federal elective conference. Now, of course, there were a number of candidates that were vying to fill in the leadership position. Now, a few months ago, Bonginkosi Madikizela was one of the very first few who went ahead and resigned from taking over in that leadership position. He, of course, still maintains his position in the DA. Then 2 weeks ago, John Moody had resigned from the party and effectively leaving his role with regards to being part as a candidate. Now it leaves two candidates. Currently, the interim DA leader, John Steenhuisen, and my guest for this afternoon, Mbali Ntuli, and I have her for the next 1 hour. Ms. Ntuli, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us on Truth to Power.
Salam alaikum, and good afternoon to you, Faraz. Thank you very much for having me.
Wa alaikum salam. No, it's an absolute pleasure. Now, Mbali, before we talk about the memo that, of course, went out this week, let's talk about your history within the DA. Of course, you graduated from the DA Youth Program, and of course, you worked so much within the branches in KwaZulu-Natal. Just give us an idea of how important was it in working in those branches and establishing yourself within the Democratic Alliance?
Thanks. Well, actually, my journey with the DA began in university formally. When I started its first DASO branch at Rhodes University. I had seen a number of issues that students had, and I wanted to get a sense of where the political parties were interested in trying to help. And I had obviously by then been quite politicized myself, given the nature of the way I grew up. And the Democratic Alliance was what I felt was a party that was needed. It was quite strong at the time. It was a great opposition party. And so I approached numerous parties. I went to numerous meetings of the various political parties, but I really found that the DA took young people seriously and was the kind of party that felt like it really could take some of this issue seriously. So that's where I really started off. And once I'd left university, I, of course, continued while I was working as an activist. And that's when I started the branches, particularly in townships like Kinanda and Druzuma and Guamashu, because to me, it seemed very important that if the DA wanted to try and grow and not just be an opposition party, that it would have to have more widestream appeal and certainly be in areas where people hadn't expected it to be. And it was really difficult in the beginning, but I found that it's been the right strategy, and it's a strategy that obviously as DA leader, I'd want to continue to see the DA in all corners of the country and really being able to find itself home in those particular communities.
And I think that's quite important because when everybody mentions the DA, they just talk about the urban area. So talk to us about the importance of going into the rural areas in KwaZulu-Natal and, of course, using that, the DA as that sort of an influence to say, okay, you know what, there is an alternative to the ANC, there is an alternative to the EFF, and that importance of going to the rural areas and having that voice to the people there.
I think it's been incredibly important, and I was the MP for a constituency called Mkhanyakude, which is the second largest in KZN, the most rural, certainly the poorest. And when I was sent there or deployed there by the DA, there was no DA presence whatsoever in that community, and I really had to start the branches up from the bottom, and I'm very proud to say that it still has the second most number of activists. I was able to, with the help of the team that I assembled once I was there, build up the system that was able to get councillors elected in every single one of the different municipalities in that district. And I can't overstate how important it is for the DA to be in those communities, because it's the only way that it's going to be able to have a shot at trying to be the government of the day. If we are not in every single community in South Africa, particularly communities where the majority of the people live, we're never going to have the opportunity to get them to trust us, to get them to see us as part of their communities, and to get to see whether or not we can actually deliver services to them better than anybody else. As it stands now, it's very difficult for anyone to say that we lament that people still vote for one particular party if they don't see any other party with them. So that would be one of the most important things that I want to have the DA really doing on a full-scale basis. And obviously that's not to the neglect of our current and existing voter base, but I think that even our existing voter base understands that the need for growth is the most urgent need for the party right now.
Ms. Ntuli, obviously, when you were, as you said, you were as a student, when you joined the DA and you work within the branches, at that time, of course, it was the ANC and, of course, it was just the DA before the likes of COPE and the EFF had come. So many would ask, why choose the DA? And is there still the belief that they are the best opposition party or the best alternative to the ANC right now?
So I've always identified socially, definitely, as liberal. I believe that the individual is sacrosanct and that we need a constitution that promotes and protects that because it's part of people's human dignity. And in my research of political parties in this particular country, I found at the time when I joined the DA, it's to be the only one that really espoused that kind of value. When my father was when I was young, my father died, and the DP at the time, through a leader called Roger Burrows, was very welcoming of my family when we moved to the suburbs and had to have a traditional ceremony in order to bury my father. And we had a cow slaughtering, and we had the African traditional rites that come with a burial ceremony or with a sort of a death ceremony. And our neighbors were very perplexed by what was happening, and it was a big scandal in the community. But what was important was that the DP lead at the time came to my family and really tried to tell us that, this is a new South Africa, and that he would help us and would help the community in order to understand that we had to negotiate shared values. And so I've always sort of known about the DP and the DA in the background, so it wasn't as foreign to me as perhaps people might think, or as it might be to most Black South Africans in South Africa at the time. So it really was, I think, a meshing of values that I found were important, having a strong opposition, having a strong party that had policies that were going to try and take care of people, but at the same time also some familiarity and probably the same amount of familiarity as I had with the other political parties. And so that's why I initially joined. I also really liked the fact that they took young people seriously and that they had things like the Young Leaders Program that really encourage young people to be able to find a space in politics if that's what they felt their calling was.
Ms. Ntuli, before we go into the break, one final question. A few weeks ago, I had Dr. Makosi Koza, and she spoke about how female politicians on the whole have struggled in the democratic South Africa with regards to toxic masculinity and chauvinism. So, from an Mbali Ntuli perspective, what needs to change, and how are the challenges right now with regards to female politicians in dealing with this toxic masculinity, and chauvinism that reigns supreme within South African politics?
Look, I must agree with her. I think that there's still a lot of patriarchy and toxic masculinity, not just in politics, but in our society in general. This is why we're seeing the kind of backlash or the outpouring and the scourge of gender-based violence that we have, as well as just the inherent system and bias that is made for men in our country. And the real way to counter that, I think, is by actually supporting women candidates, is by supporting female politicians who are trying to raise their voices, and not to get distracted by petty things. I mean, during my campaign, I've had people talking about how they think my voice is a little too high, people really analyzing things that are not of importance or things that they wouldn't analyze about a male politician. I've had people telling me that my daughter is young and that I shouldn't be trying to run for a position such as this whilst I have a young child, despite the fact that my opponent, John Steenhuisen, also has a young daughter that he's just had. And so there definitely is, I think, still an unequalness in terms of the way that the scales are weighted when it comes to politicians. But certainly what I try to do, and what I think many women are trying to do, and many women see as the way for future empowerment, is to really lift the other women around you up as well, and to create that space and to create the kind of platforms that they can start having profiles and the ability to be able to make differences. And I think once you start having that, then you start having more women who are in positions of power. It becomes something that people are a little bit more accepting of. And you can really start putting some issues on the table that maybe haven't really been dealt with. And I think it's important that it's women who want to be in those positions and who themselves are motivated, because you can also have what we see now is the most female representation almost in the world in terms of our parliament, but we still aren't having issues like gender-based budgeting being taken into account. Our Ministry on Women and Children has just been automatically assumed that it must be done by a woman. But even there, you don't see the kind of results that you expect that you'd be getting. And so it doesn't matter how many women you have. What you want to make sure is that you're also getting quality women in that place. And I say that ironically, of course, because nobody ever asks whether men are of quality to be leaders. And unfortunately, it's a burden that women still have to bear, that they have to be that much better than their male counterparts to be taken seriously. But I think it's starting to change, but a lot more work does have to be done. And I think that even sexism and sexual harassment is still quite rife, particularly in politics. And it's almost got a smokescreen because you can't really complain. Otherwise, you seem to not be tough enough to be in this arena, or that you don't understand how politics is done. And so a lot of things have to change. I would change things like when people have meetings. I think there's still sometimes boys' clubs in terms of the after-hours meetings that happen. And certainly as a female leader who's a mother, I'd be more cognizant about those kinds of things.
I'm in conversation with Ms. Mbali Ntuli. She's, of course, a DA leader candidate for the upcoming Federal Elective Congress. After the break, I will be continuing my conversation right here on Truth to Power. Welcome back to Truth to Power. Excuse me. I am in conversation with Ms. Mbali Ntuli. She's a DA leader candidate for the upcoming Federal Elective Congress. Ms. Ntuli, let's go to that memo that, of course, you put out on Tuesday. Now, in the memo, you speak specifically about cliques within the party. You speak about the egos that are occurring with especially the senior members within the party, the personality clashes, and most importantly, the purging of black members within the party. Would you say that this is the current aim of the hierarchy, and just give an idea to the viewers of how bad the situation is within the party right now?
Well, I don't speak about a purging of leaders that are black per se. What I speak about is a disciplinary process that is able to be manipulated by whomever might have political fights or issues with a political opponent at the end of the process of disciplinary. So basically what happens is you have charges, or you are charged, or you are intimidated that you'll be charged. The investigation happens, and those particular findings have to be then presented to a PEC or a FedEx. What then can happen, and has been happening unfortunately in our party, is that people can politicize how they decide to sanction the particular people who are charged in terms of increasing or decreasing the sanction. And usually the increase can be by people who have political motivations against that particular person. Now, I think in politics, you're always going to have some of these issues, but when they do, we should have the courage to confront them and to change the system in a way that allows it to be more fair. And that's why I've said that I believe we need to introduce at least 7 more independent jurists who would be able to temper if there are any kind of cliques in a particular grouping that would be able to decide somebody's fate. And I wouldn't be saying this if it was something that there weren't lots of examples of members that have said this to me, of members that have been saying this internally in the party. And certainly I myself have been at the receiving end on numerous attempts by people who have either tried to intimidate me with charges or who have charged me bogusly and have, cost me dearly in terms of my name, financially, and just emotional strain from that sort of thing. And I would think that any leader would want to put an end to that kind of thing. And so that's why I wrote the memo. I wanted people to be absolutely crystal clear about what is happening and what we need to stop as a party. Was it hard-hitting? Yes. And unfortunately, the truth often does hurt, particularly when it's a truth that's allowed itself to be permeated into a culture that happens at every single level, be it branch, be it constituency, regional, or national. And so it was important, I think, to put that out there. And it was something already that had been identified in our organizational review that said that the party had become toxic and that people had become afraid to be able to speak up for fear of this charging. Now, you never want to have an organization where people are so afraid to have a dissenting voice that they think that they can't speak, because what you're going to do is create an environment and an organization that's incredibly weak and is full of a dominant voice. And you can't have that as an organization that's trying to be one that tries to include everyone and one that tries to say that everybody is welcome. Because what you eventually do is actually be exclusionary and excommunicate and isolate those with differing voices. So I want to put an end to that as leader, and I wanted the party to understand that I take it incredibly seriously, not only because I've been a victim of such a thing, but also because I think it's killing our party and it's killing the morale, and particularly because there really is no consistency in which we see these issues being dealt with. Depending on who you are, it seems that you're able to have lighter sentences, no sentences, or even just to have things brushed under the carpet at times. And I think that that creates a real sense of unfairness in the party.
Now, Ms. Ntuli, after your memo was of course written and published, Bonginkosi Madikizela, he's somebody of course you know quite well. This week, immediately after you put that memo, he had said that, and I quote, "She does not want to lead the party, she wants to leave it." What is your response to that? And some DA leaders may consider you as a rebel. So what is your response to what Bonginkosi Madikizela has said? And would you erase their aspersions that you would like to be a rebel within the party?
I think he's proven my point exactly, is that if somebody says something different to what is dominant groupthink of a particular faction, then they are labeled as traitorous or treasonous, as a traitor, as divisive, as a rebel, as whatever they think will be the kind of insult or ad hominem attack that they think will stick. Instead of substantively being able to discuss the points that I put forward and the arguments that I put forward, as well as the solutions I put forward, instead it's about tone, instead it's about trying to pretend that I'm going to leave the party to deflect from what I'm saying. And I think it's quite disappointing, especially from somebody who's considered a senior leader, to really miss the points that blatantly that they have to resort to the kind of attack on my character that he has. But I'm also not surprised because, as I said, this is the culture of how people have really started to believe is normal in an environment. And I'm saying that this is abnormal. It is abnormal to take such umbrage at a differing opinion that you would be ready to attack your own colleague. And it's been done on numerous occasions by senior leaders, I think, to certain people. Certainly, again, I speak of myself, but I've never considered leaving the party because I also understand that this is politics and people are humans. And of course, there will be those amongst us who believe that ruling with fear and an iron fist is better than trying to rule with empathy and kindness and openness and transparency. And that's why I've labeled my campaign as a new way, because that's the kind of politics I'm trying to bring in both to the party and into South Africa. That's the kind of culture we should be inculcating. And so unfortunately, I can't be dissuaded by the kind of ad hominem attack that I saw today from a senior party leader. Now,
the Federal Legal Commission, which you of course speak about in that memo, and you talk about how it has become politicized by the FedEx. Give us an idea of how this politicization comes in with regards to disciplining some members, because you speak about some members that get disciplined and some members where they just completely sweep it out of the carpet. Your personal experience of it back in 2017, give the viewers an idea of what happened and how you became a victim of this and how some other MPs or chief whips were just said, well, forget about them, let's target a certain group within the party.
Well, I don't know if it's always targeting a certain group, but it's certainly targeting individuals. And I mean, I speak about my particular incident because I don't want to get into the details of other people's cases that I'm aware of. But certainly in my incident, I was told by the then Deputy Provincial Leader of the Western Cape, Bonginkosi Madikizela, that he had been asked to charge me in order for me to be expelled from the DA, in assurance that he would then get the support of people who would elevate him and help him to be voted in to the to be the provincial leader of the Western Cape. Now, that is a fact. He told that to myself and a number of colleagues at a lunch that we had, and he then also repeated it when we spoke to the FLC in a mediation round table where it was taped and recorded. There's no two ways about what happened there. And I think just to show explicitly why there's politicization is that whereas I was actually the victim of these bogus charges and had to be the person that had to pay the financial and the emotional strain of it and have their name dragged through the mud, he remained in his position and in fact was promoted to being the provincial leader via whatever mechanisms that were used to help him to get there. So that's why I'm saying that there's not fairness in the system of who is targeted and who's not. And I mean, I don't mean to go into being a victim. This was 3 years ago. And certainly, as I say, I've understood that sometimes this is how people play politics. But I'm saying that there needs to be an end to it. And that's why I want to be leader so that I can correct some of these unfair practices that I see, and really give people the idea that they have a safe space once again to be able to share their views, unequivocally so, without any kind of retaliation or retribution that might happen to them. In my particular case, I think that the party, no doubt, was in the wrong, I think, for not correcting that mistake. But here we are. And now I have a platform to try and correct that, and that's what I'm doing. And so I understand that sometimes it's uncomfortable when somebody within your own home is telling you what's wrong, but it actually takes much more courage to be able to tell your friends and people that you work with that things are wrong and that you need to fix them than it is to, maybe shout at the ANC and tell them what's wrong. And I hope that people can take that in the spirit that it's meant, because it gives me no joy to be able to say that this is what's come to the party. But I'm also a realist, and that these are the things that we need to fix. And that it should be taken in good faith that somebody who's willing to put themselves in the block like I have for the last 9 months to try and really show some of the issues that we have, but really give some solutions as to what we can do, particularly because we want South Africans to buy into the party, South Africans to trust that because we are able to handle our own difficult issues, we'll be able to handle South Africa's difficult issues. And I don't see that happening until we've really sorted out our house.
And that's where the next question comes in. The trust issue with a lot of South Africans, when looking at what's happening in the DA, a lot of them would say, well, a lot of the South African citizens would say, well, why should I vote for the DA? If Mbali Ntuli becomes the leader, how does she change the perception of South Africans to say we are still the best alternative to the ANC?
Well, first, I would definitely focus on speaking about the DA more. We have incredible people. We do have great governance where we are. We certainly can do more, but I think we do the best of any government that there is in South Africa at the moment. And we are able to really, I think, be the kind of party that could deliver really great services to all South Africans if we were given a chance. But I'm prepared as leader to go to those communities, to get the DA to be in those communities, to get the kind of trust from them that will really allow them to engender themselves to maybe hearing what our message is. I want to speak to issues that are far more relevant to people's lived realities. I want to speak about the informal economy. I want to speak about the fact that we have so many people who still live in states of dispossession, really, whether it's of land or whether it's of the access to economic opportunities that they need. And I think that being somebody who myself has lived the two realities of what we'd call South Africa, having family members who have never worked before, who are much older than me, seeing the kind of poverty and destitution that happens within my own family that's still on rural homesteads, but also being somebody in the new South Africa who's experienced going to multiracial schools, having multiracial friendship groups, being able to be in the socially inclusive form of South Africa that is denied to so many people who don't have the class privilege to be there. I think I can speak to those realities far more than anyone else at the moment who's running in the leadership race for the DA. And I think that South Africans need to see that they need a leader that's relatable and that can really speak to those kinds of issues. But the bread and butter issues are really what it has to be about. And sometimes I think as a party, we really have been quite high jargoned and sort of very highbrow for a lot of South Africans to understand really what it is we're saying. But what I really want to get across is that we have plans to try and help South Africans access the kinds of opportunities that help them to bring dignity in their lives and to really give them a level up. And for me, particularly as a Black South African, it's very important that I speak about the idea of generational wealth, because I think that that's where many South Africans of color still struggle today to be able to get themselves out of the cycle of poverty that apartheid and colonialism really just threw them in.
Musuntuli, you know the saying that no member is bigger than the party, or in sporting terms, no player is bigger than the club or the team itself. But have the departures of seasoned politicians like Musi Maimane, Herman Mashaba, and as recent as John Moody hurt the DA in terms of its reputation?
I would say yes. I think that every resignation from a high-profile DA member certainly hurts the party, particularly when the resignations are made with some startling allegations behind them. I think that it's not great for the party to have that happen to it. And I think that, you can't do exit interviews in a political party, but I, as leader, was certainly introspect about some of the things that have been said and really looked to seeing whether they were true. I would introspect back into the party to ask if people were feeling this way, and then be able to use the answers that I got to try and fix the problems. I think many of the leaders have spoken about similar things. Some of those do have to do with people's own personal differences with different personalities in the party. Some of them might be more systemic. And I would think that any party, any organization would be interested in somebody who would have put 20 years in the case of John Moody, or 6 or 8 years in the case of people like Musi, into trying to build something and then suddenly feeling that they actually had no ability to believe in it again. I think that speaks to a lot more than just disgruntlement. It's my personal opinion.
Ms. Mbali Ntuli, I am in conversation with her. She is the DA leader candidate here on Truth to Power. Join us after the break. We'll be wrapping up the last part of the conversation. Welcome back to Truth to Power on ITV Networks. I'm in conversation with Ms. Mbali Ntuli. Ms. Ntuli, Helen Zille, she is somebody that really does divide opinion with regards to the colonialism tweets, with regards to what she says in the media. And when looking at her, she's, of course, that superior figure that still holds supreme within the DA. When looking at her, is she still somebody that, let's just say you become the DA leader, is she somebody that you can still work with, even though there are certain disagreements on certain policies that she has within the party?
I think we all have to respect what the delegates of the Congress will decide. And if the delegates of the Congress and the delegates of Federal Council believe that a combination of myself and Helen is going to be a winning combination for the party, then certainly her and I will work together and we'll do the best to try and get the party in a position where it's able to become the alternative government in 2024, and certainly in the local government elections that we're going to be leading.
And Gwen Ngwenya is another person that I know that you haven't, I won't say seeing eye to eye, but somebody that you've had certain disagreements with. Is she somebody also that you can work with rectifying some of the policies that you would like to bring in should you become the DA leader?
Well, the leader doesn't make policy. The Federal Council and the Federal Congress make policy. What the leader does is provide vision and provide an offer of what they believe would be most amenable. But somebody like Gwen Ngwenya and other policy writers certainly have more policy writing muscle memory than I certainly have, having last done that at university. So I think as somebody who can write policies, certainly she is capable. I think that whatever the Congress itself decides on the 31st of October about the position of where the party goes, any leader that wants to lead the organization will have to take that up in its mantle. But I think, again, there is still space for any leader to craft the messaging of whatever vision the party gets behind, to be one that is still inclusive and is one that is going to try and bring South Africans all together towards a vision of trying to make South Africa a functional democracy. So I have no problems working with anyone who is prepared to be professional and is prepared to make sure that the cause is always at the core of what we try to do.
What makes Mbali Ntuli so different to John Steenhuisen?
That's an interesting
Sorry for putting you
question.
on the spot. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that John and I see the world differently. There's obviously quite a large age gap between us. But I think we've also had different life experiences, and we've had different on-the-ground experience that brings us, to the table with different attributes. But this is, of course, why I wanted John and I to have public debates, because I thought that we could both then really iron out what our strengths and weaknesses were, because I don't want to speak for him and say, I think he's great at this or not so great at that. It would have been great for him and I to both be able to have that intellectual, robust engagement. We would have put our offers out both to the party and to South Africans, because ultimately, no election, as far as I'm concerned, is internal anymore. Certainly not in the age of social media, certainly not in the age of trying to get an electorate as huge as ours behind a common cause. And so I thought it was a missed opportunity for him to not want to debate, because I think it's really going to make the DA poorer for not showing people that there's such a diversity of roles and diversity of views that can coexist in a party.
Ms. Ntuli, I want to go to the land issue, and of course Section 25 of the Constitution with regards to land expropriation without compensation. Now, I know as a DA from a party perspective is totally against this. I just want to get your view with regards to this, because there is no doubting that for 400 years the majority of the people within this country, which are the Black Africans, have been deprived of their land due to years of injustice. So what is Mbali Ntuli's take with regards to land expropriation without compensation, and is that something that can work going forward?
Well, I mean, land is already expropriated at the moment, but I do think that the way in which the bill has been tabled is incredibly problematic. But I think personally, I also have a problem with how we've really made this conversation really focused on one kind of type of land reform or land distribution. And I think people who live in Mitchell's Plain and were redirected from or evicted from places like District 6 and their ancestors really have a different understanding of what that land reform would look like to somebody who lives on rural Ingonyama Trust in KZN. And I think when we talk about these issues, we really need to be able to segment the markets we're speaking to, because at the moment, the conversation in South Africa really is almost just solely about people feeling that their homes are going to be taken away or their farms are going to be taken away. It's so much more complex in terms of what we need to be considering. But as for expropriation without compensation, I think that that is incredibly dangerous for an economy like ours. It's incredibly dangerous for people, including Black Africans and Black people or people of color, to have the very hard things that they've worked for in these incredibly tough environments to then be able to be taken away by a government that we've seen is completely irresponsible when it comes to the meeting out of its own policy formulations in a way that is fair to South Africans. So I would definitely be against it in that sense. But I do think we must have an honest conversation about how we get land to work for people, and how we get different types of people who need to speak about different issues around land to be able to do that. So apartheid spatial planning still exists, particularly in places like the Western Cape, like Cape Town. And I think that's a very different conversation to something that's happening in KZN, for example. So as leader, I really would want us to be able to speak to each community about their particular issue and really be able to drill deeply into what affects them, so that you're not speaking almost in a very generalized sense and losing people along the way.
Mr. Ntuli, you've been very strong on the subject of climate change. And we can see how climate change is really ripping the world apart in terms of the fires that are occurring in the USA, in Brazil. We're seeing what's happening in the Arctic Circle. Do you believe that the current government in South Africa is taking climate change that seriously?
Well, I think like many of our policies, a lot of the ecological and climate change papers that we have in South Africa and the policies that we have are actually quite good on paper, but it's the lack of implementation and the lack of will that we've seen really be able to take place. And I can't discern whether that's because there's a lack of interest or stakeholders within the government who take it incredibly seriously, or because it's just overwhelmingly difficult to take place. And so we have this conversation about climate change in this country, but it really only focuses on power producers and the energy sector, because Eskom is, of course, the one thing that's all in all our faces. But for example, people don't know that our cereal crops are so low that we now are having to import them, or that the Free State is one less rainfall away from being able to not produce enough food for the country. And those are the kinds of things that really make it hit home, because if you have that, then the price of maize meal then becomes a lot higher. And then people who are poor, who really have to rely on things like mealie meal and cereal crops, then become more affected because their money doesn't go as further. Then you have more hunger, then you have more people really living in even more unequal situations. And so this climate change conversation is not one that's just about whether we have enough rainfall or whether we're seeing enough trees. This really becomes an economic issue of how it affects every single person, the food we eat when we start talking about the kind of stuff that's coming from the ground. And again, poor people will be most affected because they'll be fed the food that's the cheapest to produce, that has the most steroids, that has the most stuff that's pumped into these animals that is not good for them, all in order to make profits in some cases, but in other cases, just because our forestry, our soil is changing so rapidly. And so these conversations, I wish were ones that were being really put at the forefront, because people don't understand that this is not something that's 50 years away from us. This is something that's happening currently now. And so it is something that I feel strongly about, particularly as a young person, because I don't want to be living in a world that's going to look like the Interstellar movie, where none of us can basically do anything because we're dying of so much dust, or tornadoes that are at, our oceans. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
No, it's fine.
But it is a very serious question, and I think that our government should be doing more, even in the sense of general awareness to the public and really educating people about the kinds of things that we could be mitigating this, even in our own daily homes and our daily lives.
I think you're trying to talk about some of the scenes from the film Interstellar, where of course you see the dust happening within the crops, and of course that led to the big climate change there. Ms. Ntuli, let's talk about the lockdown. And I think we've had 6 long months, 6 frustrating months that have happened within the country. But of course, the necessity was there to curb the spread of the virus. The interim leader of the party, John Steenhuisen, has been strong in saying that the economy should have had a total reopening within level 4 of the lockdown. I just want to get your view with regards to how the ruling party has dealt with regards to the lockdown, and were they correct in implementing these phases or stages or levels of lockdowns that we have had in the past 6 months?
I think it's very difficult to criticize people without having any of the facts in front of you. And certainly I haven't been privy to any of the scientific data that was used either by President Ramaphosa or even by our own team in the Democratic Alliance. And I think that hindsight becomes an exact science, because it would be easy for me to sit here and to pretend that I know should have been done at that time. I can't imagine the kind of immense pressure that happened and fell upon people like Dr. Zweli Mkhize and Ramaphosa in those particular times. And it's a very hard choice to make, whether you save people's lives or livelihoods. And of course, you want to try and have a balance. But at the beginning of lockdown and the corona virus, very few people knew what it was going to be like and what the ramifications of allowing people to gather in the way that, would have happened, or that we saw in some other countries happening. And so, I mean, I think the thing is to definitely say that there could have been more transparency from President Ramaphosa. I think it would have been great to have understood some of the decisions that he was making, because even for himself, it would have helped to engender the kind of trust that he needed from citizens to be able to actually believe that they needed to follow his instructions. I think it was started off well, but I think certainly by the 5th week in the extension, there started to be some rules that were made that seemed like they were very irregular and very ill thought out. That happened. And I think that got the ire of many of us, because already we were having extreme psychological tension around what basically seemed like a virus that was able to target and kill anyone. And speaking as somebody who got hospitalized from coronavirus, I don't say this lightly, and having experienced just how incredibly painful it is, and still having pericarditis, which is inflammation of my heart that I didn't have before, that I certainly had because of COVID. I really think that it was a difficult course to make, but they would have been made easier. And I think he would have given himself a lot more goodwill from the people of South Africa had we been taken along with some of the data that had been provided to him, and some of the research that he was using to base his decisions. But certainly many of the decisions, I think he took far too long to try and make the right call on towards the sort of middle of lockdown. But as for John Steenhuisen, I commend him immensely for the work that he did during Corona cost. I don't think it was easy to also be the person on the opposing side of some of the stuff that Cyril Ramaphosa was doing. I didn't always agree with John, nor did I always agree with Ramaphosa, but I think that they were both in very difficult positions, and it would be unfair, I think, of me to try and use the hindsight that we have now to evaluate their decisions harshly.
And it's good to see you that you have recovered, Ms. Ntuli, and that you are still active in your political field. Ms. Ntuli, when the 2024 general elections comes and you are elected as the DA leader, and of course the citizens go to the polls to cast their votes, what would you say would need to convince the citizens that they would tick for the DA come the elections, given what has happened with regards to the party and the losing of the votes in the last few years? What conviction do citizens need in order for them to vote for the DA and have them as the ruling party of South Africa?
Well, I think if anyone knew the answer to that, then, we wouldn't have political parties. You just have somebody be able to determine that and be able to win at any time. But certainly what I want to do as the DA leader is to clear up any policy confusion that voters might have about us. I want them to see that I'm a leader who's trying to make the party accountable, honest, and transparent and fair, and trying to really bring people together. I want them to believe that we're a party that welcomes everyone, that needs the input of everyone to be able to work, and particularly needs their inputs to try and get South Africa to work. And so I'm prepared to really be the kind of leader who's going to be open to criticism, who's going to be open to the suggestions of voters, and to really hear them and to hear what they're saying rather than to tell them what the DA believes they need to hear or to tell specific things. And I think when people can relate to the fact that you're trying to really take them on a journey with you, that you have a vision of what South Africa could be like, because I really do believe in this country, and I really believe that we have a country that's worth saving and that's worth having a very strong democracy. I really think that voters would be able to have that message resonate with them. And I think most importantly, the other thing is that we just want everything to work. I mean, you want to go to a police station and know that if you report a crime, it's going to be solved, or there's going to be efforts to get it solved. You want to know that you can be in your home and not worry that somebody is going to burgle you or rape or kill you. You want to know that your kids are going to school and getting quality education that they're going to be able to use to access opportunities to be able to make livings and to live lives of dignity. And I really think that if we can just get those simple things to start happening, people can really start believing that there's a way forward. And certainly my messaging would be one of getting South Africa to have some order and to actually try and be a country that works on the most simple levels. And of course, we want to talk about things like jobs, but I think that those become segmented arguments. It really is about, as a DA leader, I'm going to make South Africa work. And I hope that that's the kind of message that voters would want to hear, but I'm always going to be able to be open to hearing where their views are on certain issues.
Ms. Ntuli, if you are not successful at the Federal Congress, would you leave the DA, or would you want to contest for the next Federal Congress, knowing full well that you are still very young in politics? As you mentioned earlier, there is that huge age gap between yourself and Mr. John Steenhuisen. So if you're not successful, do you still believe that you can be the leader of the DA if it's not going to be in 2020?
I certainly wouldn't have run if I didn't think that I had the ability now to be able to be the leader of the DA. And my age in this particular race, I think, is only an advantage in that it doesn't allow me to think that I know everything about everything, and that I'm still the kind of person who's open enough and willing enough to have a team of people around me who know better and who will be able to really advise. And whether that's people internally or people in business or academia externally, I really am the kind of person who's able to do that. But most importantly, I don't think that, it's a question of whether somebody would want to leave because they're going to lose. I think people get into election races knowing that there's two outcomes that are possible. And I've been in elections that I've lost before, and I've always been able to stay in that kind of position. So it wouldn't be that I would leave because I lost. But I think that what people normally mean when they ask that question is whether you believe that the party will be everything that you want it to be. And of course not. That's why I'm running, because I think that I have something different to offer. but you try to change things from within, and there may come a time where you feel that it's no longer something that's possible, or that you no longer have the energy to do so, and you move on to something different. And so I think it's also important to allow people the space that if they feel that they are no longer able to contribute to something, that they're able to leave and to go find other places where they feel that they can contribute or grow. And so I don't think that that's ever off the table for anyone, but it certainly won't be because I lost the election.
Ms. Mbali Ntuli, thank you so much for joining us here on Truth to Power, and all the best for the upcoming Federal Elective Congress. We thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. That is Ms. Mbali Ntuli. She's, of course, the DA leader candidate, and she'll be contesting John Steenhuisen in the upcoming Democratic Alliance Federal Elective Congress, which is going to take place at the end of October. Well, that's all we have for you on Truth to Power. But I have some news for you, good news and some bad news. So let's start off with the bad news. The bad news is that Truth to Power will not be on Friday at 3:30. But Truth to Power will remain, which of course comes in with the good news. We are going to be moving to Wednesday on a prime position at 8:30. So note it in your diary, Truth to Power will be every Wednesday at 8:30 starting from next week. So I will see you then, same time, of course, but a different day that is going to be on Wednesday at 8:30. So from the Truth to Power team and myself, Faraz Patel, do enjoy the rest of your day. Do enjoy the rest of your weekend. Stay safe. We know, of course, that the recovery rates are going high, but most importantly, take care, because coronavirus still exists within South Africa. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.